And thanks for staying with us on Africa Independent Television. Welcome to People, Politics and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. On Monday, we began the analysis of the recommendations contained in the report of the committee that was set up by the All Progressives Congress, APC, on the vexed issue of restructuring, or what the party called true federalism. In this edition of People, Politics and Power, our focus is on perhaps one of the most contentious issues: resource control. Resource control is a very touchy issue, and in the debates, commentators go back in history to the period when the regions controlled the resources within their territory and paid royalty to the center. The APC committee concedes resource control to the states, but this concession is limited to onshore resources. This position is in tandem with the Supreme Court in the case between the Attorney General of the Federation as plaintiff and Attorney General of Abia State and others in 2002. Now, in that case, it was the contention of the federal government that the seaward boundary of states is the low watermark of the land surface of the seaward limit of inland waters. The government maintained that the natural resources located within the continental shelf are not derivable from any states of the Federation. The 8 littoral states disagreed and claimed that their territory extended beyond the low water mark onto the territorial waters and even the continental shelf. The Supreme Court agreed with the federal government that the seaward boundary of states was the low water mark of the land surface. The recommendation of the APC committee is therefore in agreement with the judgment of the Supreme Court. Some littoral states, as presently constituted, do not seem to agree with this recommendation, which may appear on the surface as a review of the Supreme Court decision. Now, let's even assume that the APC is honestly desirous of applying the required political will. How should the party approach the issue, bearing in mind that politics will be involved? Should the party not begin to think of mitigating the tension with a possibility of making up the derivation fund from 13% to maybe something higher? This will also fall in line with the advice offered by the Supreme Court for a political solution to the issue, and possibly in line with the recommendation of the 2014 National Conference, which also recommended a higher percentage for derivation for the oil-producing states. Now, that is the issue we are interrogating on People, Politics and Power. And joining me in the studio to discuss this issue is a legal practitioner, a politician, and a rights crusader, ILEMONA ONOJA. Thank you so much for finding time to join us. Also with us is a youth from the Niger Delta region and the Secretary General, Ijaw Youth Council, ALFRED KEMEPADO. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, gentlemen, welcome. We will be launching into the issues very shortly. Well, the APC True Federalism Committee also made some recommendations that directly touch on local government administration and place of origin or place of residence. It wants local governments expunged from the Constitution as a tier of government. And of course, in doing that, it says it should become the responsibility of states. Let's take a listen to what the chairman of the committee, Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State, said at the presentation of that report to the APC leadership.
We are, by this, recognizing that the federal system that can only be 2 tiers of government. Having 3 tiers of government is an aberration. There is nowhere in the world where our research has shown us there is more than 1 tier. There are only 2 federating units in any federation, not 3, not more. So we have proposed these amendments to the Constitution. We have also proposed amending Section 1 of the Allocation of Revenue Federation Account Act to reflect this reality. We have also proposed amendment to Section 40 of the Value Added Tax Act to vest all VAT revenues to the states that can then distribute to the local governments according to a formula designed by the State House of Assembly. We've also drafted a bill to repeal the Monitoring of Revenue Allocation to Local Governments Act 2005, again to reflect this reality. The bills are in volume 2 of our report, Mr. Chairman. Then there is the Mining Act, and then the Petroleum Profit Tax Act 2007. So we have proposed certain amendments to reflect the reality that we recommended that minerals and oil can be invested in the states except offshore oil and minerals. And we have drafted all the bills to give effect to this. Mr. Chairman, the issue of citizenship and the continuing debate over indigenous and settler has also been addressed by our report. Many people say that the issue of settlers generates a lot of controversies, especially in conflict zones. On the issue of indigenship or place of origin, some argue it is discriminatory and should be replaced with residency. The problem with this, however, is that while place of origin or indigenship is an immense one, residence can be multiple. Difficult to ascertain for the purpose of access to privileges open to the people of the state or local government area. Perhaps, instead of resident, domicile should be considered as an alternative. Domicile has been legally defined as home, permanent home. So it is around this, Mr. Chairman, that we have proposed amendments to the Federal Character Commission Act to recognize domicile as qualifying a person to be an indigent of a particular state or local government, and we have proposed a bill as such. Arising from this, Mr. Chairman, side, the issue of ministerial appointments. Section 147, subsection 2 of the Constitution requires Mr. President to nominate a minister who is an indigent of each of the states of the Federation. This provision in the Constitution, Mr. Chairman, compels the President to have at least 36 ministers, whether he needs them or not, and the word indigent was used there. So we are proposing that the entire subsection 3 of 147 be expunged because it's no longer necessary. The President should have the freedom to nominate ministers from every part of the country, subject to confirmation by the Senate.
Governor Nasir El-Rufai, chairman of the APC Committee on True Federalism, reeling out some of the recommendations of that committee. And by the way, that committee's report will be made public on Wednesday here in the nation's capital, Abuja, when the committee and the APC as a party would formally be unveiling, making a public unveiling of that report. And at that time, every Nigerian is expected to have the details of the recommendations of that committee. But from what we know of the recommendations as presented by that committee to the party last Thursday, we are looking at some of those recommendations. Resource control, or what the committee has described as onshore, offshore mineral resource control, and of course the whole issue of local government administration in Nigeria. It's a long-running one from 1976 when the issue of local governments became very intractable, and up to now it's posed a hard nut to crack, but the committee is recommending that it should not constitute a tier of government, and that local governments should be expunged from the constitution and made the responsibility or the jurisdiction of the various states of the federation. In other words, it is recommended that there should be only 2 tiers of government, federal and states, and of course the devolution of powers along those lines. Out of the 68 items on the exclusive list, the committee has recommended that at least 10 of them should be removed from the exclusive list and moved on to the concurrent list, so that states will have some more responsibilities to carry, and by implication, some more resources to carry out those responsibilities. My guests in the studio, ILEMONA ONOJA, a lawyer and a rights crusader, thank you, and ALFRED KEMEPADO, who is the Secretary General of the Ijaw Youth Council. Thank you so much for joining us. First, let me ask you if you have seen the report or at least read a bit of the report. What's your general take on this recommendation?
First of all, I have read a little bit of the report, and that is where my first reservation is. In the manner that the whole restructuring committee has conducted its affairs. It has conducted its affairs as a party. As a party, the admissions to the conferences and committee hearings have been rather limited. Representation has been determined solely by the party.
There is a committee that was set up by the party.
So we have.
It's a party affair.
You have a reconstruction. What's the word I'm looking for? Restructuring that is solely party proposed. Now, this does not come in line with what the general agitation for restructuring has been, where it will be as inclusive as possible. This has come across as exclusionary because the party has received recommendations of or memoranda, basically from the people it has decided to receive those things from. If I remember, in recent history, we saw in 2014 where a national confab was held and where several political parties were invited, traditional rulers were invited, states were invited to send representatives, rights groups were invited to send representatives, and there was a conscious effort to make it as inclusionary as possible. Now, to my mind, an inclusionary committee deliberation, an inclusionary activity that seeks to discuss the major rudiments of a restructuring will always be better than something that has been carried out solely by one political
are you
party.
suggesting that what the APC should have done would have been to ask government to empanel another national conference to do this?
Simply put, what the APC should have done should have been to go back and pick up the 2014 confab report.
It said so. The committee said so that it relied on recommendations of various committees from the past.
We're basically trying to reinvent a wheel that had already been invented. Many things that this committee report seeks to provide for were already provided in 2014 confab report.
Which it was not part of.
Which it elected on its own free will and volition not to be a part of. However, several states that were APC controlled at the time participated in that panel. Several states on their own chose to send representatives. So whether it chose to at the national level, at the state level, it had representatives. My point is this: it could have picked that, made some alterations if it felt the need to, and sent it to the National Assembly. That's where we should have started from. Okay. You should take into consideration the fact that there's a constitutional amendment that's already ongoing. So with this report on restructuring that is on its way and hasn't gotten to the National Assembly yet, we're about to either have a completely different set of constitutional amendments, or we're about to go back to begin the entire constitutional amendment process from the beginning. It seems convoluted, it seems like a distraction, and to my mind, it just seems as though there's no sincerity of purpose. It feels as though this is something that is only being done. Remember that this panel completed its task a long time ago. It did not consider, it did not deem it fit to submit this report until the criticisms from, as contained in President Olusegun Obasanjo's letter, made it to the public.
The submission of a report is when the committee completes its work.
It does feel like all this is contrived.
Okay.
To distract.
Okay. Alfred?
Basically, I will want to deviate from the details before the report. But the submissions of the reports are not different from what we had all asked for. With the hit song, restructuring and other things. We're talking about resource control, onshore or offshore. From the region I come from, these are the things we had always requested for and agitated for. These are the things that we have been demarketed for, even when we are marketable. So I want to concentrate more on working out the details and reinforcing this committee. I can quickly agree that over time, especially over the 2 years, Nigerians, including myself, has been nourished from very many broken promises, including the fuel scarcity that we all face. But that's not the point. We must also realize as Nigerians that whether you call it the APC, the PDP, or any government or any recommendation, if the government at the center fails, everybody fails. Now that the government has come up with these recommendations of restructuring, policing, states merging, and other things, the question now is, are these things true? Yes, they are true. But is it true that we also do not trust the messenger? Some are, probably because of precedence. But what can we do as Nigerians, apart from the APC? Let us all come together and see how we can reinforce the recommendations of this report. The beautiful thing in it is that it's not a litany of many things. It's just about 10 things. And these are 10 things that are very key. You talk about local government. For me, coming from Bayelsa, I've always frowned at the numerous local governments that are represented in other states. My Bayelsa has only 8 local governments. Recently in police recruitment, officers were taken per local government. It means where Kano State was having 42 officers, my Bayelsa State was having just 8. So technically, you've shortchanged me from the hierarchy of the police. These are my worries. So if the recommendation is coming up with far-reaching, like scrap local government and other things, yes, it becomes interesting to me. But to the extent that this, even if we go back as states, of course you may agree with me that some of our states are not viable. Even if we go back as states like we have in Bayelsa, like you have in Lagos, states have a way of creating local development authorities for administrative convenience. But the narrative and the question that should be viewed properly is it beneficial to all these proposals? If it is, how do we reinforce them? Then it is not also bad if people think it is for the sake of politics. But you see, those who are also criticizing it, like I am also tempted to criticize it, must also not do it for politics. This is 2 years into the administration of the APC. I am not a member of
Almost
the APC.
3 years.
Almost 3 years. And they are coming up with these proposals. What we should concentrate on is how to reinforce, like I said, and track them or panel beat them to come up with committees. Whether you call them committees involving the civil society, involving the National Assembly and all assemblies, and especially the will of the presidency to see how we can drive these things to productivity. That is extremely important because you see, Imoni, if we are not careful in this country, instead of supporting what brings about good governance, that brings good road to whoever, irrespective of party line, who may be busy criticizing instead of reinforcing. And that is my area of concentration. So my point is, I may not like the messenger, but let us all come together to twerk, panel beat, reinforce, like I said, the message and see how we can make a productive end out of it. For me, it's a political tool. We think, and many Nigerians like me think, APC has not been sincere. This is another way to hold them accountable to a recommendation. Recently, the president made a presidential broadcast on a New Year Day. And in his presidential broadcast, he was tangent to our agitations with respect to restructuring. He was talking about, he was trying to jettison restructuring. But today the party has come up with, this is the way. For a party to begin to use words like restructure, resource control, merging of states, policing, these are far-reaching recommendations that needs commendation and reinforcement.
So we should, for now, focus more on the message and not the message.
Exactly, because the message, let me tell you something. One thing you need to also understand about the dynamics of the message is that the message is not a message of APC only. The message is a message of Nigerians. I've just told you the case, in my case, about the police. Do you want to talk about the owning of resource control? For us in the Niger Delta, when you talk about resource control, people think we just want to catch our oil. Like I keep saying in many fora, resource control for us means, yes, taking advantage of our resources, much more than the oil, to advance our economy beyond oil, to a more innovative and productive economy, such as you have in Dubai and other case studies. So it's a whole lot of things. But you know what I will finally tell you? Their recommendations, even when presented after now, does not translate to mean a Bible. Okay. It means it should be subjected to further
which is
twerking.
Exactly what we are doing here on this program.
Exactly.
Trying to nudge the parties and nudge the government.
And hold them accountable.
Yes, and all of
exactly.
that. So, Mr. Lemona, what is being said here is that since the message seemed to resonate with majority of Nigerians, why do we need to focus on the messenger and not the message?
We're not focusing on the messenger so much as questioning or interrogating or critiquing or discussing what the intentions of the messenger are. If you're going to bring me a message,
every message has an intention.
By all means, if you're going to bring me a message from a place of verifiable antecedents. Like you said, on the 1st of January, the president was dismissive of the entire, on the 1st of January, which is 29 days ago.
And that was not the first time.
And that was not the first time.
Yes.
He's been very dismissive, arrogantly so, of the entire conversation about the need to restructure Nigeria's system of socio-political governance.
Is there any government that has not been dismissive of the restructuring agitation?
If you even check the chairman of the panel, in 2014, wrote an article dismissing the entire restructuring debate. Nasir El-Rufai, governor of Kaduna State, dismissing it. So now we have a chairman who's dismissed it. Now we have a president on the platform of a party who's dismissed it. I'm sorry, I've had my hopes as a Nigerian dashed too many times on account of false promises, on account of kites in the sky that simply don't fly, such that when you bring me a message, it is as important to me to question the messenger as it is to question the message.
Okay.
It is. And I believe that unless we see, particularly from an administration that went so far as to deny its own campaign promises, from a party that kept mute while its elected highest officials denied their own campaign promises, you cannot help but question what the motives are.
Now,
and if you take into consideration the antecedents of both the executive at the highest levels of the land, the chairmanship of the restructuring committee, and the general attitude of the party, I'm sorry, but as with many Nigerians, this report is met with a great deal of skepticism.
Be that as it may, Lemona, you rightly said the chairman of that committee was up till now anti-restructuring. But here he is making a 360-degree, because in principle he could have opted out of that committee if he did not believe in the work of the committee. But he was not alone in that committee. I think there were about 17 or 16 other people in that committee, and they went around Nigeria, and according to that report, they took submissions from well over 8,000 people across the country, across the 6 geopolitical zones, and they have come out with these recommendations. Now, to my knowledge, there is no government in Nigeria that has not been dismissive of the restructuring agitation at any point in time. It took a lot of agitation for President Goodluck Jonathan to set up the 2014 National Conference. But of course, we know that after the recommendations were made, they have been led to gather dust somewhere. Even the ones that required only executive action to implement, that didn't even need legislative process. But this committee says it has, in fact, as part of the implementation process, made draft bills on each of these items that will be sent to the National Assembly.
Let's quickly pick one of these issues.
The most critical one, or at least the most prominent one of it all, is the one that ALFRED chose to call the resource control issue. That is the onshore, offshore issue. This is an issue that has been on the table for a long time. And like I said at the beginning, this was an issue that the Supreme Court had to determine in 2002 on the offshore-onshore dichotomy matter. What's your take on it? This recommendation, how will it serve the purpose of true federalism?
To my mind, and I'm trying not to sound too critical, but you see, if we remember the outrage that greeted the Supreme Court decision in 2002, there was a considerable amount of outrage, simply because what it had done was it had taken the resources made available, that were available to the states, it had taken them completely away. Most of the oil assets in the littoral states, 9, not 8 of them, most of the oil assets are offshore. Once you take exclusive control and you vest in the federal government, there's nothing left. Akwa Ibom had lost virtually all of its resources. Cross River, same thing. Rivers, same thing. Why? Because a majority of the oil assets are offshore. A vast majority. So basically, this gives you with the left hand and receives with the right, which is why even in its own judgment, the Supreme Court realized what was going on. The Supreme Court realized what sticking to the letter of the law was doing. And so it made a duty of saying there has to be a political solution. There's been a political solution that has brought us so far.
That's the 13%.
That is the 13% derivative principle. Yeah. Anything as well, we haven't seen what the draft bill is, but as presently taken into consideration what the chairman of the restructuring committee said and what we have read about it in the press so far, it recreates a dichotomy that a political solution had resolved. So we're basically going back to a problem that was created in 2002, 15 years, 16 years ago. I don't think that is the way forward.
Except that this time around, it now includes other mineral resources.
That does me a favor. That does me a favor in the North Central. I come from Kogi State, right? So it does me a favor in that it takes mineral resources and puts
that are basically, those mineral resources are basically onshore.
That are basically onshore.
Yeah.
And put lime, columbite, iron ore, and blah, 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 blah. It takes those and seeks to, it says maybe we should put them in our hands, right? But what does it do?
But does not serve the interests of the littoral states.
It doesn't. Why am I interested in serving the interest of the littoral states? The littoral states have owned 13% of the resources that they produce since 2002. But they have owned 100% of the pollution since I can remember. So how do we leave them hanging in the middle of nowhere, up a narrow creek with no paddle in a dark canoe? At some point, we have to take into consideration the golden goose that has fed this nation for so long. And as presently constituted, this report only serves the interests of some parts of the country and not all parts of the country.
Fred, did you agree with that?
I agree with him to a large extent, and I want to also thank him for making a case for me while I'm even here. Because when you talk about the littoral state, that's where I come from. All the while, what we have agitated for is total resource control. For many reasons, time may not allow me to put up here. But what we are saying now is, before now, we had 100% of nothing. And the recommendations are beginning to give us something. And these are just recommendations. So, like I said here, it's for us to reinforce and begin to twerk it and begin to look at the details. So that at the end of the day, like you rightly pointed out, which I had also considered, let it not be that what is even described as onshore, at the end of the day, is even less than the 13% that we were receiving. Probably some technicians may have calculated this behind to further shortchange us. So we begin to look at that. Like I said, it's not a Bible. We begin to look at these details. This is where we now need members of the national and state assemblies to all come together, civil societies and others, look at these documents and ensure that even if we don't get to where we hope to, we are far away from where we used to be. So much that at the end of the day, the details fetches us more than the 13% derivation. To put it simple is that the details fetches us resource control to a large extent that we can continue to build on. Because, my dear, 60 years has gone down the line. We've been agitating for all of these things. And we have had nothing. And no party, like you rightly said, had come out at any point in time to say, this is it. So, like I rightly said, this cannot be a Bible. We need to see the details. We need to know what is in it. If what is in it is taking us in the direction of resource control, as we are agitating for, by many means necessary, this is also a means. For me, I may have personal reservations. In all of the recommendations, I am still asking questions like, what is power still doing in the exclusive list? Now, when you go further, what I'm trying to say in essence here is, let me say it in the countryman language. Now then don't talk resource control now. Now then don't talk the restructuring, which they ran away from 29 days ago. Grab it and open the door for the twerking and the debating. Because let me tell you, after all, it does not take just El-Rufai or President Buhari to make this happen. The baton has just been handed over to every one of us, including him, including me, and the members of our National Assembly. It's for us to run far with this baton. So this is not a time for us to kill or close this window. It's a window that we didn't expect from them. And it's a window that we are expecting many of them in their usual insincerity to scuttle. But I am saying, and we are saying, let this window for restructuring and so forth be made open, just like they have opened it. Then let's open it to more windows. At the end of the day, I will not be surprised if we now get 100% of restructuring.
Yeah, let me come in, Jay.
I have to be optimistic.
You're very optimistic.
No, I have to be.
I asked this question. Yes. I had a guest who sat exactly where you sat yesterday, who's a member of the National Assembly, the House of Representatives, and I asked, this committee has recommended devolution of powers. Yeah. And I recall that in 2017, devolution of powers was one of the items that was rejected by the National Assembly when it was considering constitutional amendment. And I said, what is the guarantee that when these draft bills that the committee says it has put together goes back to the National Assembly, that there will be a more positive approach to it? If you remember, he said that now this is coming from the party will engage with these members in the National Assembly and ensure that this is done properly this time. That seems optimistic, but like you said, are we being too optimistic? Okay. Now, if you remember what I said ab initio, when I talked about the factors that could drive this to a conclusion, I also talked about the presidential will. Let me speak informally on a formal program. If the presidential will gets into the National Assembly, it has a massive influence on the National Assembly. That's right. And
we are expecting that presidential will, which is not a law, to drive the National Assembly to drive this to a conclusion. Let me tell you this. Buhari is 74, or more than 74. I mean, Mr. President, with due respect. I will think, and I will suggest to him taking this platform, that at this age, what he owes Nigeria and Nigerians is legacy. He is the chief custodian of the presidential will. What we should be crying out here now, whether you like it or yes, he is our president, is to hold him accountable to use his presidential will, distant from the comments he made on the 1st of this year, to see how we can drive this legacy to a conclusion. That is why you asked me that I'm being optimistic. I am not expected to be pessimistic over this kind of matter. I'm expected to be optimistic and have that optimism as my goal and hold the APC accountable. What we should be discussing now is to say, APC, the ruling party, you are politicizing this agenda, and we can hold you accountable and make you fail the next general elections if you don't drive this to a conclusion. After all, you are majority. What we are expecting that from now till the next 1 year, we want to see result and not talk.
Okay.
Because we have been nourished by many fake talks and recently fake promises. So my optimism is positive. Not positive to the extent that I trust them. Positive to the extent that I want to hold on to the message and hold on to them to join me and Onoja and others to drive this message, because after all, it's a good message for Nigerians, and it's going to do great good for this country. Okay. So I'm not really interested
Fred,
in.
Yes. Before I come to you, Lemona, let's quickly take a sound bite from the APC spokesman, who was also on the program yesterday. It was here, Malam Abdullah, he said, was here on the program yesterday, and he commented on why the party embarked on the exercise in the first place. A move that has now received a lot of commendations and knocks too from different quarters since it was made public last Thursday. Let's take a listen.
So we felt that, yes, we had this embedded in our manifesto, but it's important for us to aggregate the opinion of Nigerians. You will say that, yes, there are past constitutional conferences whose reports we could easily have adopted and used for the purpose that we wanted to serve. But again, these kind of conversations have always taken place at the elite level. So we felt we needed to go out, and from thereupon, upon our inauguration, we went around the country, 2 meetings in each geopolitical zones. And we had a total of close to 8,000 people attending all of those meetings put together. So what you have in this report that we submitted is an aggregate conclusion of the opinion, the views that capture the aspiration of Nigerians across the length and breadth of this country on what their definition of restructuring would be. Do you understand what I'm saying? So for us in APC, our understanding, our conceptualization is that we will pursue the agenda of true federalism in order to improve governance across Nigeria. That's the way it was framed in our constitution. Now, what it entails, what it means to every Nigerian will require for us to listen to Nigerians and bring them on board. And this is what we have. So
that was Malam Bolaji Abdullahi, National Publicity Secretary of the APC, who was on the program yesterday, speaking on why the APC embarked on this exercise. Mr. Onoja, let's quickly look at the whole issue of the derivation principle vis-a-vis this report. Now, at the moment, the states, the 8 literal states have 13% derivation. This report has not said take away that derivation, that 13%. At least that has not been stated in this report.
Have you read the report?
No, I have not read. So the devil, they say, is in the details. When they make public that report tomorrow, then we will. But from what we know so far, this report has not said take away the 13% in exchange for the onshore, offshore.
That's not what the reporter said.
Well,
What the reporter said is create a dichotomy. With the onshore, vest it in.
Isn't that what is right
No, that
now?
isn't what is.
Isn't that what the Supreme Court
That's what the Supreme Court said.
And isn't that what is being practiced?
No, that is not what is being practiced. There was an onshore-offshore dichotomy abrogation act that was passed. That's not what is being practiced. There was a political solution, which the Supreme Court said, go and resolve.
Okay.
Politically. There was a political solution, right? So, what this act, what this recommendation is let us jettison the political solution. Let us go back to
the Supreme Court.
To the Supreme Court decision solely. Because from what we have read, exclusive authority and ownership over offshore assets will vest in the federal government and leave the state governments with onshore. If you go to Bayelsa, where you're from, how many onshore oil assets are there? Really? How many are there? Akwa Ibom, Rivers, Cross Rivers, they're all offshore. Which is why, when the Supreme Court made the decision in 2002, there was an almost instant response, negative response. There were protests all over the place. The headquarters of, and the offices of major oil companies in the south region of the country were all barricaded and blockaded. We're going back there. The report is saying, let's go back to 2002. Now, between 2002 and now, the agitation has been for something completely different. The agitation has been for
an increase of the derivation from 13%.
As
the 2014 National Conference actually recommended an increase.
An increase. If we go by the Supreme Court decision, without having seen the calculations that have been done so far, if we go back to the Supreme Court decision and recreate a dichotomy, what we'll actually be seeing is a reduction in revenue that goes to the littoral states. Now, like I said before, we can jolly well just keep quiet, those of us who are from other parts of the country. Because at the moment, we get next to nothing from, in fact, like I said, I'm from Kogi State. Ajaokuta has failed, refused, and or neglected to work. This puts some sort of control over Ajaokuta in our hands. Mm-hmm. Will that favor him who's sitting down here?
Okay. Yes.
I think the argument is being misunderstood somewhere. Like you rightly asked, that does the recommendation take away our 13%? These are questions we need to interrogate.
Yes.
Does the recommendation mean that we now own all onshore plus 13% or even more? That is why I'm saying, let me make it abundantly clear for the records. What we are agitating for and what we stand for, and we have not changed the position, is 100% resource control. Do you understand?
Onshore,
but
offshore,
offshore.
all of it.
That is our stand. But no government, with respect to all governments, have been able to make any pronouncement towards that direction, except the 30% that we have. Now, now we have a recommendation that has opened up a platform or a realm for further negotiation for us to own the 100% or close to 100%. So what we are saying, like Onoja is saying, and I appreciate the fact that you like my people, is, bros, open up the conversation. The conversation was closed by Mr. President.
So this recommendation can actually create room for more interaction,
more negotiations, more trust trading,
and eventually improve, like the Bayelsa State Governor says, make it all more inclusive.
Exactly.
And bring everybody on board, and perhaps...
It hasn't been...
Don't forget, the Bayelsa State Governor, has been a proponent of this struggle since he was in AG, up to even when he was the legal advisor of the INC. Even recently, it was only about the governor shouting restructuring. So what I'm trying to say is, my brother, we want 100%. But the conversation in recently, with due respect to many stakeholders, including very elitist stakeholders, were mute. Nobody was even talking about restructuring in recent times. It was like if you talk and Buhari could come flog you.
No, but
Now, excuse me. Now,
please round up because our time is up.
Now, the talk is that the party, which is bigger than the candidate of the party, has opened the floodgate for further conversation. So let's have the conversation and see if we can have 100% or 90%. We can even review how the offshore is talking about. Let us get the details and track it.
Okay.
This is
finally, very quickly.
Yes. Let me just quickly disabuse. When you, Alfred, you have repeatedly said no government before this. I disagree. I let it go the first time, I'll not let it go finally. The Jonathan administration held a conference where it was recommended in strong terms that the allocation to the littoral states be increased from 13%.
I'm not talking about I'm talking about owning our resources. I'm not talking about allocation.
We're talking about
we are not talking about allocation. We want to own our resources. We want to own our resources.
Gentlemen, our time is up. We must go. I mentioned that before, that the 2014 National Conference actually recommended an increase, but nothing was done about it.
In percentage ownership.
We want to own.
No. So it was moved from 13 to between 17 and 19%. That was the
so let's see if we can move it to 90%.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. This is an ongoing discussion. Like we said, the devil is in the details. When that report is made public on Wednesday, we'll get to know whether or not the onshore offshore issue actually excludes the derivation principle or indeed includes it, and then all the others we'll come back and we'll be looking at them in greater details. But for now, ILEMONA ONOJA has been my guest, a lawyer, a politician, and a rights activist. Thank you so much for joining us. And the Secretary General of the Ijaw Youth Council is an activist from the Niger Delta, ALFRED KEMEPADO. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's our program for today. Join us again on Wednesday when we bring you a fresh edition of the program, People, Politics, and Power. I am Imonia Marire. Do have yourself a wonderful time for the rest of today. Bye for now.